I think that there's this misconception that when you work with someone like JumpCrew, it's boom, light switch turns on, dollars start coming through the door. It's like, if I'm not going to do it, I'll just pay somebody to do it, and then my problem will be solved. But unfortunately, that is nowhere near the case. There is a lot that happens from green light, go, JumpCrew to things actually working. And I think you are uniquely suited to be the expert in what that like black box of time looks like. And I mean, one in particular comes to mind, which is short-term rental platform, like probably the biggest in the world. Most people could probably guess what I'm talking about, but you were instrumental in getting that thing stood up. And you went from day zero to now, which has been what? How long has it been? It's been
coming up on like 2.5, 3 years.
It's been a minute. So
yeah, it's been a minute, a lot of pivots.
So you've been in the trenches from day one. And like, I think that's what we don't get to share that often is what is actually happening in the background to go from I see an opportunity to go to market for this thing to we're in market and actively selling. Like just tell us what day one looked like.
Yeah. And I think to back it up as well, like kind of like echoing what you were saying, a lot of times people are like, I just want to buy the house and move in, which is what sales is. They don't see that what we do at JumpCrew is we build the foundation. That way you can live in that house for 60 years and so on and so forth. And so like with them as an example, as far as like day one, like it was not out of the box pretty as far as our sales strategy. When I think back to like day one, as far as like what we were doing and what we immediately identified as like, ooh, okay, roadblock. I think that's like first and foremost the most important is recognizing that no matter how much prep I do with that team, with the hiring team, with the training team, like I can build that foundation as best as I can, but there's going to be a lot of questions on the front end that I just need to be ready to recognize and move and do it fast. And so like looking back on like day one, I know like the first problem we immediately recognized was, ooh, okay, ICP is a little off here. We hit the phones hard, immediately started with like 50, 60 outbound dials, plus a couple other touch points. And on day two, we were able to, just from being in the weeds, recognize that, okay, we're a little bit too far right here. I need to get us back to center. So immediately that started conversations with my ops team, their internal ops team around how do we like refine this a little bit more rather than kind of going, oh, it's okay, we'll work through the kinks.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is they're like, oh, no, you need like 2 weeks, a month, 3 months to test that and figure that out. I think what we've built here at JumpCrew is I've seen it 10 different times in 10 different ways that on day two, I was able to recognize, great, we have a data problem. Here's how we fix that. And what that looked like was coordinating with their internal teams, recognizing where they were getting the data from, what even their filters were. And what we were able to do is back into that and find that like, oh, we need to tighten up these filters and immediately fixed from there.
When you talk about ICP, ideal client persona, like when you noticed that there was a disconnect, was that because of the hypothesis of who we thought the ICP was going to be, or was it the mechanics of how that was filtered through the data tool, or a combination of both?
A little bit of both. So we started broad, which makes sense because you want to test and figure out what your ideal ICP is. So we were calling into property managers, boutique hotels, other like hot locations as well. So we did a little bit of a test as far as unique verticals and then also unique test grounds as far as like cities. What we immediately noticed was like, ooh, okay, going after these boutique hotels right now, we have the wrong title because we made the wrong assumptions, which is fine. You fix it fast, and that's what you do. And then we also came in assuming that our messaging was going to land with them. And I think what we did is we did a lot of education and research on the front end, but you need to be open and vulnerable to know that, like, even if I think I know these people, if they're telling me something different on a phone, I need to be able to then educate my team and go from there. So a little bit of messaging, but then also a little bit of, we grabbed the wrong titles. I think too, looking back, and we were able to pivot pretty quickly on that, we should have held off on the hotel space because that is a larger learning curve and focused more on those property rental spaces because that's where messaging was immediate. They understood the pain point. We immediately were providing that solve. And so we got the quick wins there. We adjusted our ICP to focus on that, build confidence with our sales team, be able to make sure that we were also providing return on investment sooner rather than later. And then we slow built into those boutiques. And that's where we actually ended up seeing the most success.
So you're in a leadership position. It's the first couple of weeks of going to market. And are you getting reps that are turning around and saying, man, I can't get through to anybody and it's all qualitative? Are you seeing that there is a disconnect in like activity to connect rate or connect to conversation rate? And like, there's got to be a couple of those red flags that you're triangulating and saying, whoa, like we got to make a pivot here before we're way too far gone.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, especially when we're talking from like a rep perspective, it's trust and verify. You can tell me all day long that you're running into this, but if I'm not getting hard facts on that, whether it's through leveraging my CRM and leveraging the data tools I have in that CRM to be able to pinpoint that issue, because a lot of times we need to remember that like the reject that we get is 10 times stronger than the yes that we get as well. So love my reps, but trust and verify. They can let me know where I need to start looking, but that's where I really trust, again, like that data to show me, okay, what does that actually look like? Because if you're telling me that you're not getting connects, that can mean a million different things. It could mean that we don't understand when we should be connecting or how we should be connecting with this audience. Could be a seasonality thing. Could be that, hey, we're calling into the property management space and they're primarily in the afternoon actually working on their properties and out of office. That's actually the shift we need to make, is we need to have really intentional morning conversations and follow-ups in the afternoon. Other thing to look at as far as like data as well is really looking at like, what's that average talk time? Are we leveraging like the right phone numbers? Are we using the right balance of texting, email, and having that be personalized and hitting on those pain points? Because it could also be that like, hey, I equipped you with the wrong materials. And that's actually why you're not getting through. It's not because we're not in the right ICP. It's because we're approaching it differently and we need to adapt in that space.
It's like you're looking at this combination of talk time, the types of touches that are landing, the connect rate to conversation rate, reps turning around and giving you feedback on the trust and verify. So you're having to really kind of assess all of these different data points all at once. Because I hear this a lot where we'll be kind of exploring a relationship with someone like, well, we had a sales team and it didn't work. And I love that blanket statement, that it didn't work, because then the next question is why? And usually the assumption is, well, it wasn't the best talent. Like we just didn't have the best salespeople. And I selfishly, probably because I am a salesperson and take that personally, I'm like, well, let's look at the framework in which that salesperson was, because even LeBron James on, a different team could have a completely different outcome than the supporting cast around him. So how quickly is this timeline where you decided it's time for pivot number one? Are we talking days? Are we talking the first couple of weeks?
Yeah. So we initially, and again, I think with launch, like the first week and every day of that week is vital and important, because that is going to paint the picture for the rest of your partnership. And so we made those pivots within a day or two immediately.
A day or two after launching?
Yep. We had people on the phones. I always tell like my managers and even my reps that like, hey, what you're gathering right now is going to tell us if we're on the right point or if we're not. Now, yes, there is definitely validity in pivoting too quickly. However, in these cases, that's why it's important to paint the entire picture. It's not that I'm pivoting because my rep is like, oh, this isn't working, right? Or it's not because my data is telling me one thing, but my rep's actually saying, well, kind of is working. It needs to be that full picture. And I think too, you also have fail safes in there as well. So, hey, we're going to continue on this path, but here are the little tweaks that we're making along the way. Once I set those benchmarks too of what success looks like, as soon as I hit that benchmark, I'm like, great, full shift, let's go.
Yeah.
And go that direction. You have to do it confidently though, but you also, I think, have to have the humility to understand that like you're going to be proven wrong a couple of times. You're going to make a misassumption. But at the end of the day, what's important is that you're owning the data, you're owning the fact that you're going to pivot, you're going to educate, and you're going to move. That's what makes successful sales teams. If you can't own that, you're going to end up coming to a partner like us and saying it didn't work before and I can't tell you why.
That ownership component is so spot on. And like it is difficult to have simultaneously the agility to make pivots and also the patience to let those pivots really start to compound, because it's going to be 1,000 tiny things. Like the question comes up like, well, JumpCrew, how do you guys do it? Like, what's your silver bullet? There is literally no silver bullet. It's just a collection of a lot of fundamentals done well over and over and over and over again. And when you are going into launch for this team in particular, and you're establishing what you think the framework of reporting is going to be, like these are the inputs, these are the data points that I believe we're going to measure. Now that you have a couple of years underneath your belt and you look back on that, like how many of those are still the most important metrics that you're reporting on, and how many of them are completely different and you didn't even know were going to be valuable when you launched?
I think especially with this client in particular, we came in with like the basics. We're like, hey, here's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at your funnel from a top-down view. I'm going to make sure that I'm looking at what our new pipeline creation is, what those conversion rates look like, where our drop-offs are, and then also collecting data around like, why didn't we close? Why did we disqualify? High level there, but then also taking into account like, what are our connect rates? What are like all of those little benchmarks that we also coach our reps on as far as like giving them success. A lot of those are still true through this day as far as like important benchmarks. But over time, you recognize, especially working with an account like theirs, the additional little data points that make all the difference. And I think that comes from, again, like being curious and not just saying, hey, like we're doing it. Stuff's closing. Okay, this doesn't look like it's working. We'll just pivot more over here where stuff is working. It's taking the time to sit with it and go, how does this all connect? So like one thing that we started tracking with that was not only launch time, but also track to success on the back end. So at the end of the day, like, yes, we're responsible for closing and getting those initial sales. But I also recognize that it's great if we get a sale, but if it trails off, then my team actually didn't really do their job. I want sticky sales for my clients. I want them to be repeat customers. I want them to be people that are referring to others in their line of business around like why they should be working with our clients. And so that was one thing that we started tracking. What we were able to find is that, hey, like from a high level view, it looks like this one vertical launches really fast, but they never are successful. And that started a really great conversation with the client around how do we get them more successful? How do we get them more resources? That way they become sticky. And that's now a data point that we track. Is not only like their go live or close date, but what is that back end information telling us? Because then what we did is we actually pivoted and said, hey, like these are great quick wins and we're still going to be closing and connecting with them. But what we're noticing is actually the smaller segment of data, the smaller vertical we were working ends up being a lifelong customer. How do I put my team more in front of them so that I can create that lifetime value? As like we're continuing to build up our processes and making sure that we're getting those quick wins and that we're working with the client on like how do we keep them and cultivate them. But more so for right now, as far as like return on investment, how do I get this small segment, make it a big segment, and how do I get in front of them more and more? That way my team's more actionable.
Yeah. And really specific to this team in particular, like let's get very narrow on your specific leadership takeaways from this account. Like either anything that you learned specific to launching this team that was like, well, had no idea that was going to be a hitter, or anything that you've taken away now to your book of business that you manage that as a sales leader or a generalist, you now say, hey, I learned this on this team and I can see this applying across the board. Like what was one big takeaway that you had that you would not have had without taking this team to market?
I would say in this team in particular, and I've brought it to quite a few of my clients now going forward, is it's great to test multiple verticals. However, in the beginning, stick to one or two. And it's not because I don't want to limit sales. It's because that's where I noticed that we were able to be very intentional with our outreach. We were able to be very intentional with how we educated the team. I think especially like when we work with clients where their scope is so broad that whether it's SMB, mid-market, enterprise, they have just so many different types of businesses that can use them. That's amazing. And that gives us a lot of runway. But I don't necessarily think it's the best strategy to start with that much open. Because then it kind of muddles your testing because you don't necessarily know what's working, what's not working. You don't get to be as intentional. I think there's a build-up process there. And it can happen really fast. It can happen over 2 months, 3 months, very quickly. But I think you need to be that much more intentional in the beginning, because that's where you can clearly say, this works, this doesn't work. Now, how do we expand and apply? I think people get really excited in the beginning. They want to test out all of it and go from there, that shotgun approach. I've seen it burn us more often. I think having that hyper focus with a plan of expansion is where we've seen the most success.
It lends itself to your takeaways on the ICP too. Like you were learning about job title, but having some specificity and realizing that's not working quickly and then moving. Like, how do you think about allocating or maybe like segmenting a team? Let's say you've got 10 people. Do you put 10 folks all focused, running at one vertical so you get a massive amount of data and information super quickly? Or do you think, all right, I've got 3 verticals we think are going to make sense. Let's split this team into 3 groups, have them each run in their specific vertical so we can stay focused and specific. But then I can kind of get a little bit of both where I'm staying focused, but I'm also collecting information across multiple verticals at once.
Yeah. I think that comes down to the kind of team that you currently have. If you have a brand new team that's just going into this space, I would say don't necessarily verticalize off the front. I think what you're going to do there is you're going to get potentially some faulty testing, because if you're like, ooh, I have 3 really great verticals and I think this one is going to perform the best, and you put the wrong rep on it, you're then discounting yourself for the future. So I like to say, like, just like how you test data, you test your reps as well. They're going to all have unique strengths. And especially if you're going to verticalize, I think you start general with them as far as giving them a little bit of each, then quickly understanding through a lot of hands-on coaching, a lot of looking at the data, a lot of understanding where, again, like their strengths are, then going into verticalization. I've just seen it a couple of times where we've tried to do, whether it's territory-based, vertical-based, and you end up giving your top rep the weakest vertical. So then you don't have that immediate success. Or on the flip side, you have a rep that has like some space for coaching, but they actually be stronger in a different vertical. You put them in the wrong vertical. So just like you need to get to know your product, you need to get to know your reps. Now, if you have a tenured team, that's where I say, like, great, let's go ahead and verticalize, because I have that relationship built. They're familiar with the product and I know where I can confidently put them. Commonly, we like to call, like, put your aces in your places, making sure that you have the right person in the right spot to do the right job.
And finding what that unique specialty is or skill set is of an individual, does that just take reps, getting them out in the wild and seeing kind of what they gravitate towards? Is that part of your interview process when you're getting to know somebody before they even start? Like, I think that the human component of this can oftentimes get lost because we're so focused on the outcome. But part of standing up a sales team, no matter how clean the operation is, no matter how sophisticated the tech stack, no matter how experienced the leaders are, is you are ultimately putting people into seats to execute a very difficult job. Like, how do you go about learning quickly what skills fit what person best, what vertical suits one person best, just kind of what that archetype of each individual is so that you can put them in the place where they have the highest likelihood of being successful?
Yeah. I think it starts with that initial hiring process, understanding what can be coached versus not coached based on the sales team. So what fundamentals do I need to see in that interview process that I need to flush out that I won't compromise on? There are some verticals and some sales teams where, like, I need you to have that specific background because I don't have the time to coach you on that. I don't have the time to give you those life lessons that are going to make you dangerous in this space, if you will, and effective in this space. And so recognizing that quickly in the interview process, as far as, again, like, what is coachable and what can I build within someone pretty quickly versus what are those raw skills I need to see in the very beginning. Now, as you continue to expand teams, that's going to change. And I think that's also important, is taking that time to reflect, hey, here are the non-negotiables in my initial hiring class. How did that serve me? How did that propel my team forward? And what are some additional ones I need to add? Or what were some that we uncovered that, hey, like, actually, this is easy to teach and I don't need that as much. So I think that's part of the process. I would say, too, as far as, like, identifying those as they're hired, is really paying close attention in the training process. Where are you seeing light bulbs go off? What kind of questions are individuals asking? Where are you seeing them already ask questions that are 3 steps ahead? Because that'll also give you insight into, one, how do they learn? How are you going to best manage them? But also, like, great, these are some skills I'm seeing that are probably going to be best served in this kind of environment, whether that is BDR versus AE or AE versus AM or sub-verticals or even territories. So I think, again, just taking that time to, one, make sure you're prepped and ready in that interview process and that you understand, again, what you're going to compromise on and what you're not going to compromise on, what's coachable versus what's not coachable. Making sure in that training process that you're looking for those green flags as far as, like, okay, that's going to make them really successful here. And then also proving that, quote unquote, in the wild. So when they're on the phones, are they doing these things naturally? Are they needing to get coached to? Are they naturally curious about this and being a self-starter in that space? All of that comes then back to, great, when you're ready to expand, what did you learn in that? And how do you continue to make the better hires throughout? Which I would say, too, like, obviously with JumpCrew, we've done this for so many different verticals that a lot of times we get to start from 10 feet ahead because we've seen it in the past. What is a soft skill that can be taught versus what's not for a lot of these verticals.
And it sounds like there's so much investment that goes in to each individual and to the collective team before they've even made their first phone call. And I think that comes from the recruiting and hiring process. But what I also think gets missed is the sales enablement piece of this is that as a sales guy, like I love being able just to show up, be like, where are my meetings? Put me in, let me just pitch something. But to make someone as effective on day one as possible, a lot of work had to get done in the background between folks like you, operations, learning and development to make sure that when they got there, were trained and made phone call number one, they felt they had everything in their toolkit to be successful. So from your point of view, as you were prepping for that first class to come in and start, what did you guys have to do in the background so that when they sat down in their seat and were ready to make that first phone call, send that first email, run that first pitch, what had you already built for them so it was there, which otherwise they would have been just kind of sitting there wondering what the heck they were supposed to do?
Yeah. Preparation is key. I think too, especially when you're lifting a brand new sales team, you want that sales team to be as confident as possible. So if there is lack of preparation, you then have another battle you have to fight where it's like, great, we're building this together. And I now also need you to buy in, even though you don't feel like you're set and ready. I've had the same experience as a salesperson where I've sat down and been like, okay, do I actually have the tools to be successful here or not? And if you can give a confident salesperson the tools that they need to be successful, then you are already miles ahead. So as far as like preparation in that space, what we did ahead of time just to make sure that our reps would have that confidence right away is we did a lot of deep diving into what the current resources were for that client. So understanding what case studies they already had, what their understanding of the environment currently was in the verticals, and then being able to translate that into, okay, you've been in this space for 10 years. Here are all the little things that you're not talking about that we're probably gonna have to train on. Jargon is one that is commonly skipped over. And what I need for my reps is clear jargon, clear understanding of that landscape, because they're gonna be able to come in and be confident speaking to, for example, property managers. Some of my sales reps have never spoken to a property manager before. And so making sure that they understood what their day-to-day looked like, what kind of terms that they were using, what was important for that property manager or for whoever that ICP is that they're reaching out to. Because then it looks like they've done their homework, they've done their research, and now they're confident and they're able to actually speak to that person on their level rather than coming in and trying to talk up to someone, which is what we hate. So that's part of the preparation process. I think too, making it as simple as putting ourselves as leadership in their position and saying, if I was expected to make a phone call today, what are the 10 documents I need to be able to do that? And going down to like that level. So if I was given leads, what does my documentation and training look like as far as like how I even discern all the information on the back end of this lead? How do I leverage where they're located? How do I leverage the fact that they are in this part of the country and this is happening right now? How do I leverage the fact that, okay, they have a different amount of properties and they're also managing these different kinds of properties? How does that scope out that conversation differently? From there, also talking through, great, how do I even operate my CRM? How do I get this information across the board? How do I do the little simple admin tasks? And making sure that I have clear documentation on that, clear processes, whether that is training deck, video deck. I think everyone learns a little bit differently. And so making sure that we have learning tools for every different type of learner. So getting very granular, I think that's like a misconception, is that people just think like salespeople get a script and I go. You're going to pitch to people. There's so many additional documentations, training resources, builds. Ops does that as well. They do the same thing with data. We score our data to make sure that we're recognizing that like, hey, here's our low-hanging fruit, top 25%. Here's the medium. And then here's the stuff where like we could have some great opportunities in here, but we're probably going to have to do a little bit more digging. How do I also coach a rep on how to approach that data differently? So a lot of build out on the front end that doesn't necessarily get seen, because my goal is that I give it to my reps in a pretty package and they're just ready to read it, go through it, digest it, and then they're ready to go.
There's definitely a saying that, sales is hard. Like that's fun and easy to say, but like there are actual days I know I've experienced where I literally cannot figure out what the problem is. I've tried this, I've tried that. Things are not going well. We're not connecting. Revenue's not hitting. Things are breaking. Like it feels like the sky is falling. And because there's so many elements to a sales org, a marketing org, and having those two things working together, that it's often difficult to figure out where like the leaky faucet is. Like, does a day like that or a week like that or maybe a month like that come to mind in your experience where it just felt like sky is falling and what am I going to do here?
Yes. It happens, right? Where you feel like you've tried to solve a lot of problems and that you're making momentum and then nothing is clicking or nothing's functioning, right? So at the end of the day, like what we are is we're a sales engine and I need all of the parts working so that I can get from point A to point B. And one that comes to mind is just like that. My reps weren't connecting. When we were connecting, horrible conversations. My reps were getting frustrated because they just kept saying, hey, I'm getting people on the phone, but I can't even do anything with them because they're not who we need. They're not our ICP. They're not the right people. Obviously, trust and verifying that. I even got on the phones and I was like, okay, yep, nope, that's a problem.
These are shitty.
And then also just our messaging around it too. Like even when we got the right people on the phone, we weren't connecting correctly. And it felt more like we were just spewing features rather than being able to find that pain point with that prospect and then provide a solution and provide next steps and provide how we're going to then make their day better, right? Through our products. And so it happens. I think with that, it's easy to get caught up in the details and get overwhelmed because you're so in the weeds and you're thinking almost like I could fix everything right now, but then I don't actually know where to start. And also we don't have enough time in the day to fix everything all at once. Obviously having a layered leadership team helps with that, but that's not always the case. So realistically, I would say like first and foremost, what I do is I look at the entire funnel. And take that 2 steps back to recognize, okay, where are our actual bottlenecks and what can I do to fix that bottleneck? And looking at all of the factors and then checking boxes of like, okay, it's not this. And I've gone to my team that focuses, for example, on data. And I can say without a doubt that when I look at the data, when I take myself removed, okay, our disqualification rate is only 5%. That's in the norm. Great. It's not that. I can safely check that box for right now. Where am I going to go next? Okay, we're not getting people on the phone. Awesome. Why is that though? Is it because my reps aren't executing properly? Is it because as simple as they've been using the same number for 3 months and they're marked as spam? Like there's all these little details that go into that. But I think taking a breath and then making it into smaller chunks and checking those boxes along the way, whether that's whiteboarding it out with your team or going step by step through the sales process and being able to confidently say, this is broken, this isn't broken. I think from there, once you figure out what's broken, what's not broken, you go into like your shoulds and coulds. I should do this, I could do this. Understanding what is an immediate need versus what isn't an immediate need and what's also going to make the most impact. Because it's really easy to say, well, I'm going to fix this one thing and we get that instant gratification because it's fixed. But at the end of the day, did I just put a lot of energy into fixing a tiny thing that actually isn't impacting my team? So it's a lot of tough conversations. It's a lot of having extreme ownership over what is actually going to get the needle moving. And I think, too, it also comes from having that mindset of, okay, I get to stew on this for 5 seconds, and then the rest of my time is problem solving. And going back to what I know and what has worked in the past and uncovering and verifying, is it working? Is it not working? Is it a feeling that I think it's not working and the sky is actually falling? Or is it versus like the sky is actually falling? It's a gritty process. It's not fun when you're doing it because you're stressed and you're trying to figure out what the solution is. But taking that detailed approach and taking it line by line through that sales funnel, you then uncover what's actually going wrong. The most recent one I had was I was hyper-focused on the bottom of that funnel and I was like, we are not closing. And I am stressed and I need more closes because my client is now breathing down my neck and they're like, where's that ROI? I was looking at my AE team and what I'm happy that I did is I didn't just hyper-focus on that AE team. What I did was I did it a couple levels up. And what we uncovered was our marketing was off. Messaging was wrong. ICP was wrong. And so when they were getting into those demos, into those sales calls, there was a complete disconnect and they were trying to build rapport based on something that didn't make sense. And so if I had hyper-focused on that bottom of funnel, I would have just been coaching my AEs into circles rather than focusing on what the real problem was, which is that we had the wrong messaging, which meant that I was equipping my AEs incorrectly, which meant that we were never going to close because we didn't have the correct, here's how I'm going to solve your problem. And here's how you use our tool. And here's why it's going to benefit you. And so sky was falling, but quickly assessed, fixed, sky was no longer falling.
It's like one of the best skills that a go-to-market team or a leader can have is not a technical skill, but it's simply the ability to know what does move the needle. Like as you're going through and doing that audit of all of those different inputs, top of funnel, mid funnel, bottom funnel, is it people, process, product, all of these different elements that could potentially be the squeaky wheel. Like you've got to know that, hey, I don't need to just make a case study because a rep said, can we get a case study? Yeah. Like that is such an easy reflex for us salespeople is like, well, I just need another case study. That's going to help me close the deal. When in all actuality, it probably was exactly what you just described, which was they were just speaking to somebody who was not an ICP fit, didn't have high intent to buy, and was maybe just window shopping because they don't get that many calls that often. And so they were like, oh, can you send me a case study on this very niche, very fringe use case? And then your marketing team is expending resources on creating something that is not going to move the needle. And so you have to have the ability to actually discern what does or does not domino effect, scalable results, as opposed to just being that one-off like dopamine hit of doing something that feels good in the moment.
Yeah. I feel like too, a lot of times we focus on those outliers because we want to solve all the problems rather than saying and recognizing this is an outlier. I will give it attention, but where my attention needs to be is actually on this base group. What do I need to do to move the needle for them? Yes, business on these outliers are great because those could potentially be new verticals that we jump into or new use cases that we jump into, or eventually we build out new products for them that actually gets them to be sticky. But if you focus on those, again, outliers, then you're never actually solving the root cause. And so making sure that we don't let the noise get in the way of, to your point, what actually moves the needle.